Welcome to Absolute Neanima, the series all about everything cinema within the world of Arknights, and today we crack into what I'm thinking is a mistake for the sake of fooling it. For context, I have a spreadsheet that documents all the members of the Cinemaknights niche, which then has them sorted by layers depending on how far you want to go with the niche. If you want to find that spreadsheet, it's in the description of this video and pinned in the Discord, which you should join. Anyway, one of the layers is what technically counts as a completely different niche knights entirely, ambient synesthesia. I'm not going to explain what ambient synesthesia is right now. That's something we can do at a later video with a little more reading them, I guess. But all you need to know is that ambient synesthesia gets offline screenings in cinemas. Well, and that's frankly all I need to justify using my favorite operators like Mumu within Cinemaknights. So anyway, for my specific take on this subgroup for the niche, I am only counting those who have ambient sensation skins or AS skins. Because if we counted actual appearances in the concerts themselves, or hell, those limited time perfect cards as sell, you would basically just be playing normal Arknights at that point. Still, AS skins does rope in some very boring operators like Logos, Ines, Silver Ash, Luminar. Yep, there's a Shoshi in my DMs now right now. With that said, though, it also gives you access to operators I like. For example, my elf wife Mumu, Fun Sufficer Stainless. Also, Gunbird Ivy the topic of this video, Snake Wife Huliak. I love Hull because I feel like she's a 6-star made for people like me. One that prioritizes a fun gimmick over practicability, especially in a really terrible yet fun niche, which is, in this case, well, it's the levitate niche. Because levitate operators are so popular. Isn't that right? Aroma, Oda, persons whose name I can't pronounce, Irene and Chongye S2. Yes, it's not like only two of you see uses for your actual good skills or obscene damage values. Something Huliak doesn't really have, but it doesn't stop me from loving her. Like, God, I love everything about Waifiak, from that damn smile, her AS skin, her story, to the S3. And if I can use Cinemaknights as an excuse to roll her out all the time, I will. So anyway, let's get this goon session out of the way so we can talk about some more core members without her being on my mind, which will never happen because right now it's Halltober, baby. Where should we start with the Hall discussion? I'm guessing with her talents because her class is the very bland core caster subclass. Well, bland is probably the wrong word to use here to describe how I feel about them. I think humbly versatile would be more accurate because, well, I think a very simple class identity is what can greatly help as a guideline in how to push its potential to the max. Uh, Having none like protectors, pioneers, and core casters have had, it leaves for a very diverse pool of options. Like, don't forget, core casters, Diggers, Chamimi, Nightmare, and Absinthe operators with very unique identities, which they got due to the lack of restrictions placed on them by their subclass. Personally, I think it's very interesting that they choose to have Huliak in the core caster subclass, because now she not only benefits from the rather solid module options, but she also has to compete against the likes of Aya, Kyobi, and Board. Personally, I would have tried her out in the Mystic class, caster subclass, but that's my bias showing. Anyway, her talents are okay. Inherited End is her first talent, where she gets a 20% increase to her attack and the ability to silence for 3 seconds if they are aerial. Annoying silence because it's worthless status effect in modern AK. The 20% extra damage seems because of the restriction until you remember that levitate makes enemies be considered aerial, and all her skills focus on that status effect. It's effectively free damage for doing her job, while giving her an anti-flying role because fuck Jones. This talent is so core to her identity, her second talent is just here to help achieve the conditions needed for it. Bygone Wings applies Weightless to enemies in her range, who are above 80% HP, which is rough, but we should explain how Weightless helps levitate. Now, contrary to its name, Weightless doesn't remove the weight mechanic, because if it did that, Pandora's box would be open again. What it actually does is remove a weight level from an enemy. Basically, if an enemy is weight free, they would become weight 2 when under the effects of Weightless, which just means more distance traveled when hit by a shift. This is usually meaningless outside of challenge stuff, but for levitate operators like Hull, this is actually a little more meaningful. You see, the duration of a levitate condition is cut in half when the enemy is weight 4 or higher, which means Hull has less time to be impactful with her first talent. Being able to apply her own status, well, weightless status, is effectively giving her skills training rules, although it's applied extremely limitedly because 80% or higher HP threshold, and most enemies are weight 5, so nice try, I guess, but hey, the mod Y saves us here, and let's talk about that. Okay, first we should do her mod X first because it's her release module, and I think it's alright. Mod X trait is pretty solid because it just lets you ignore 10 res, which is basically a free 10% extra damage on enemies who has res stats. And Mod 3 is an extra 15% damage and adds 2 more extra seconds of silence for Inherited End. Yes, when I said it, I think this is alright. What I mean is, it's worth only the Mod 1 is alright, and you only get Mod 3 if you're trying to make her into a 6-star version of Unpronounceable. Being serious now, it has its uses in some scenarios where it's much better than Mod Y, but I would still consider anything higher than Mod 1 to be a luxury territory. Mod Y, on the other hand, is her good module, because it takes notes from Mr. Frosty over here. Mod Y gives you the SP barrier effect when normal attacking elites and bosses, but Mod 3 lets you apply Weightless within a 50% or higher threshold, which is a huge improvement to the training rules, but then gives her a whopping 20% arts fragility to enemies below the 50% threshold. That's big, because it allows Fulia to not only do more damage, but allows her to act like a debuffer on arts damage focused teams for free. Mod Y is just a huge improvement for the Snake Wife's performance, and I heavily recommend it if you also want to be Snake Wifing. In Search of Reason is our first skill, and I'm indeed searching for a reason to use this skill. Too mean? I think that was too mean. Anyway, it's an AFK charge skill where she gets 2 separate attacks, each doing boosted damage, but if both attacks hit the same enemy, they get levitated. Very exciting stuff. Look, it does good damage at skill level 7, which with a 260% modifier, so let's just throw up the maths for that with different modifiers for Mod Y's free. Mod Y frees fragility, inherited ends 20%, and both at the same time because of matrices. And I can't wait to be told that arts fragility is calculated differently, and I have wasted everyone's time once again. No M3 maths because I think M3 is for fanatics, and S2 does the multi-target thing better. It's worth noting that the 2 attacks it fires off don't stack on the same target in terms of damage, and it will prioritize 2 targets over the levitate. I personally actually use this skill a lot, but that's because it's less micromanagement for me, and I think it's just a better than S2 in most situations. Honestly, if anything, it's a good anti-aerial skill because aerial enemies will always suffer their 20% extra damage, and it will hit 2 of them at a time, so it's a niche use if snipers are banned for like a challenge run, I guess. Just don't look at Snowboy over there. Meandering Stars is her S2 and is the actual crowd control skill that S1 wished it was. Over a duration of 16 seconds, Hull changes her normal attack to a burst of 9 hits, each one doing reduced damage on random enemies in range, with each hit having a chance to levitate for 1 second. Yes, it does sound worse than S1 in terms of CC, because now it's a chance instead of guarantee like S1, but this is the closest thing you'll get to doing solid damage across multiple targets. While S1 can do that, it's definitely more geared for single target usage, while a skill like S2 performs worse in that single target scenario. It works best in a group scenario, and the masters do encourage it. We get like an extra 3% chance at M3, which may not seem like a lot, and then you times it by 9 and then realize it's an overall improvement of 27%. It also gives an extra 10% at M3 in terms of damage, so that's an overall increase of 9% across the board for damage. You may have realized I haven't put up the maths yet, and that's because I think this skill is actually worse than S1. Look, I can slander S1 all day, but look, I would really rather use S1, because if I'm in a situation where I want to be using S2, I'm just going to be using a splash caster, God forbid a chain caster. But who in this fetch hell would have a chain caster built? The point is, if you're using OS2, you're just being so desperate to not use Purgatory, or Faceless Wind, or Snowcat, or God forbid a chain caster, but 2025, when splash casters have module Y, well, let's be honest, you're just trying to be funny by choosing to use a chain caster at that point. Anyway, this is probably has actual usages that make it, well, makes it better than S1, but I really ain't seeing it. Probably because I'm just being blinded by that smug look of superiority. The SV well read, well, it's not well read, it's read, it's well read. Read, fucking English. Well read ravings is the real reason to use her, because I think it's just plain old fun. Basically, for 45 seconds, Holiak will increase her attack intervals and pump up her range to marksman range, and this is all in service of the main event. She basically starts firing off fucking tornadoes across all three rows of her attack range, which scales in damage based on the distance traveled and levitates the first enemy hits. There's like a bunch of specifics like min damage and max damage ratios and projectile travel time, but who fucking cares? The point is, you're launching mini tornadoes to cover a bunch of lanes. It's cool as fucking shit. Stats though, at skill level 7, its damage varies between 253% and 308%, and levitates for 2 seconds. And I'm skipping straight to M3 mass because the M3 breakpoint of a 2.2 second levitate, and also the fact that 253% being an acceptable ratio is so gross. Anyway, maths on screen for both min and max ratios with the usual buffs. Yes, that is a lot of maths. I fucking hate it already, but it is what it is. All that said, let's put this out. This skill obviously has flaws because if it didn't, Holiak would have more fans. Let's start with the big one. The tornadoes are single targets. We are definitely not utilizing the full potential of this skill because she could have easily been like a Persuader Blastcaster with SV if the tornadoes passed through enemies, even if it meant severely tuning down her levitate and damage as a result. Like, sure, we got the levitate Blastcaster with Roma, but I'm not justifying this train of logic. The point of is Horsh would have been well more liked if they just did that. What I just said. But look, that's that, and this is well this. So, what are the other problems of this skill? Well, it's the levitate because while 2.2 seconds is a lot, the tornadoes travel at a speed of 1 tile per second, and to reach its max damage potential, it needs to travel its full range, which in this case is what takes like 4 seconds, which means you're only getting the max damage potential once per enemy, and it's not even a very good stall skill. It also gets worse once you equate for the possibility of wait 4 or more enemies, because now it loses its main value as a high DPS stall skill, because that's less stall. It does solid damage at least and can kill most elites in two tornadoes, but against enemies with high res or big HP pools, it's practically useless. And let's be real, a lot of casters can kill elites faster than it takes Hold to send those 2 tornadoes because increased attack intervals. I'm not even gonna look at her SP cost because I really want to focus on the usability of this skill, but let's just be thankful that her god module is the SP battery one. With that all said, though, I think the rule of cool applies here, and Ravings is a cool and unique skill. It's nowhere near practical, but I think you'll be hard pressed to find an operator with a skill as cool as Horus 3. So that was Huyak, a very fun yet kind of bad operator. I don't think she's completely useless, but for a 6-star caster, there's definitely better choices. For example, Lin, who's a very fun take on a frankly boring subclass. Ivanhoe's because Mystic caster. Laptop for her applications in various things, and so forth. I definitely wouldn't recommend going out of your way to get Huyak unless you're desperate to wife her, but I think if you happen to acquire her, definitely build her. She's one of those rare 6-star gacha operators that prioritizes fun gimmicks over power, and I think just for the spectacle of her SV is, well, frankly worth the price of entry. You probably wouldn't use her in high end content, but for everything else, she's beyond serviceable, possibly even beyond good. Low key though, I would love to see her give them a delta for an elemental damage, or hell, maybe, just maybe, a second skin, which will ideally be her summer skin, because you're sitting on a gold mine hyperglyph. There's a significant overlap between Eblana and Huliak fans. So if you give Eblana a AS skin and Huliak a summer skin, you could generate enough money to fuel the development of Enfield for 50 years at least. Make it happen, Greenlight.